All right. With this lovely tune, I very much warmly welcome you to our webinar today with the title Starting Strong in Capacity Planning. I'm Nora, your host for today's session. I work as a transformation consultant, helping teams design better ways of working, ones that are purposeful, flexible, and actually make sense in today's world. And this is part of Run's Leap webinar series, where we spotlight bold ideas and practical strategies shaping the future of resource management. And Run is purpose-built to make capacity planning and resource planning smarter, faster, and more human. We'll dedicate the last 15 minutes of today's session for your questions and answers. So as you follow our conversation, I warmly invite you to capture any questions in the Q&A section here in Zoom webinar. Also, what we always love is to know that you're there. Feel free to use any reactions here in Zoom webinar. Also share any thoughts, any reflections in the chat. It's always nice to know that you're there and you're engaged and with us. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker. David Binnings is the Senior Director of Go-to-Market Service Strategy and Operations at DocuSign. He has over 25 years of experience and specifically over 10 years of experience in the resource management arena. He has helped transform resource management organizations across different industries through data forecasting and operational strategy. And as you might already pick up by his virtual background, he's very passionate about guitars. So a little fun fact, he has over 20 of them with him, but he has a favorite one, which is the black one, which I just learned. So David, we're very, very excited to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Very happy to be here. Excited for the conversation.
Nice. So I would suggest let's kick right off. We've got our topic, capacity planning. And before we dive into some of the challenges in this field, I'm really curious to hear from you. How do you define capacity planning? How does it kind of look like in your world? How is it connected to the arena of resource management?
Yes, I think, when I think about capacity planning, I think about long-term views of headcount needs, making sure you can have the right person in the right place at the right time. So really looking across, how many headcount you need, what kind of skills you need, and what the demand is to meet that, right? So there's a lot involved in that, but at a high level, I think that's the big news, having a good long-term picture with accuracy on what kind of skills and demand you need.
Love it. So not tactical, more long-term. And when we talk about long-term, can you give me like a rough indication? Are we talking 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, plus 5 years? What is long-term for you?
So I think in any business, 1 year, if you can get to 1 year, I think that's a good gold standard. Beyond, you start getting beyond that, there's so many variables that can change and come into play. It's difficult to do that. So I always target trying to get, if you can get 1 year, that's a sweet spot.
Fantastic.
Allows
Thank
you to
you.
react. Allows you to react
Yeah,
within a year.
nice. So now I am really interested in kind of your perspective. What are some of the common mistakes organizations make when planning capacity, and how can those pitfalls be avoided?
Yeah, I think one of the key things I find people make a mistake, especially like in a services, if you're like in a professional services organization, is the demand that you need. A lot of times people focus on the sales forecast, what are we selling? But they
Mhm.
miss out on other things like if you have to do $0 work or there's a lot of internal projects that are asked of the team, even though you might not be generating revenue necessarily, there is that demand on resources, and that's often missed in a good capacity model. So it leaves you with like a gap of sorts. Also, I think looking at headcount, just a headcount number. A lot of people would say, "Oh, we need X amount of headcount to deliver," but kind of fall flat on the skills part of that, right? So it's not not all resources are the same. So you need different skill sets for different things. So it's really important to look at that demand versus that capacity. So I think that's a place where you can hire people to go fit your need, but who and what do you have to train them on, right? So that's oftentimes missed. And I think one key thing too I see a lot is expecting perfection, right? I think people get really wrapped around, oh, looking at trying to get it 100% accurate. I don't have all this good data, so we can't possibly do this. It's don't look for perfection, right? Especially you're first starting off, get a good, if you can get 80% there, and then progress from there. That's a great goal. Just not to get stopped in your tracks because you don't have everything perfect, right? So those are three key things that I think are common mistakes that people run into.
Amazing. That makes a lot of sense. Let's kind of double click on the first one around not being able to kind of look at the non-dollar work, $0 work, so internal projects. Can you maybe share what are the critical non-dollar generating kinds of work, and how can resource managers successfully basically account for them in their capacity planning?
Sure, yeah. I think there's several different types of buckets. I can speak for if you're in a product organization running a services business. It differs from if you're a pure services company. I think most people are probably in that services and a product company situation. So a lot of times there's $0 work you have to do for customers. So if a customer's in a bind, there's an escalation at some point. Oftentimes, professional services gets pulled in to go help in those scenarios because they have the experts in their field. So those are things we have to account for. That's one bucket. There's other things that are legitimate internal projects, and I think about things like if you need to support the product team or the support team with some expertise from your area. Products like, hey, we'd love to have somebody from professional services right along with us to help develop the product better because they have so much experience with customers in the field. So that's another big bucket. And I think the best way for resource managers to account for that is to look at some historical data of, especially if you're doing time reporting, how much time are you spending on that? That'll give you a first good glance into what's the rough amount of time. This kind of goes back to like not getting perfection, right? You might
Mhm.
not get it down to the specific hour, but you can look at trending over time. How much time do we spend on $0 work? How much time do we spend with product, right? Those kind of things. And then you can start setting budgets for that as you start doing capacity planning. So we're working with the business leaders based off of the capacity models we have. We're forecasting, X amount for $0 work, X amount for supporting product, X amount for supporting the support teams, whatever it is for your business. And then you start setting budgets for that, and you can build that into your capacity model as a part of the demand.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for providing a bit of clarity on that. And maybe just from your very own approach, uh, how much kind of percentage wise or from year after year comparison, how much percentage do you account for this type of work?
It really depends on the business, because everybody does things a little bit different. I think usually of the productive type work that we do, we tend to forecast anywhere between 6 to 10% on
Mhm.
those kind of $0 activities. Work that we're going to be doing for internal customers or $0 for external customers.
Nice. And the second common mistake you mentioned is just looking at the headcount and not at the skills. And this whole kind of topic of skills and how to track skills is very complex. So I wonder, David, with all of your 10 plus years of experience in this field of resource management, do you have any advice for people listening in who might feel like, yes, this is perhaps something I need to look into more? What are some tips and tricks from you in the space of skills management?
Yeah, two key things. One is put it in a system. Put it in your PSA tool. There's a lot of times people have spreadsheets or it's in somebody's head. It's hard to manage that way, right? So the first thing is get it in a system. The second thing is to make the list of skills, the lowest level should be what you staff to. Oftentimes you get into a situation where, I'll come in and say there's like 400 skills. It's like 400 skills it's hard to keep that up to date. So nobody keeps it up to date. So it becomes, obsolete. nobody's using it to make staffing decisions. So just determine what skills you need to really make good staffing decisions for your projects and
Mhm.
just have that level of skills. So that could be 20 skills, right? And if you get down to that level, then it's much easier to keep those up to date so that you have accurate information. And so those are the two things. If you can do that, that's like keep it simple and keep it in the system. And that way,
Yeah, that resonates. Just maybe out of curiosity at DocuSign, how many skills are you tracking roughly?
yeah, it depends on we have different lines of business. So it's probably in the 30 to 40 per, for the lines of business that we have. And it comes out of product lines too, because you have product lines, you have some specific
Yeah.
nuanced skills you have. We have a lot of roles too. Like most people probably have a lot of roles, project managers, consultants, things like that. So
Yeah, nice. Awesome. So, for anyone listening in, thinking about capacity planning, I usually understand that resource managers might start off in their maturity journey with a more tactical approach, more looking at day-to-day, weekly staffing. So, capacity planning is already an activity a bit more advanced, right? Looking at the longer term, more like strategic, how can we shape the business in a year's perspective. So, what advice would you give to someone who's just about to start building a capacity planning framework from scratch?
yes, I think it's really getting a good picture of both the demand and your resources that you have. So getting it down to that base level. Usually I think that there's three buckets of demand that we tend to look at, and one is like what is the backlog work, what's been sold that we expect to deliver, and how does that work typically get delivered, right? So if you look at your backlog and say these kinds of things typically take 3 months, or these types of things take 6 months,
Mhm.
getting just a rough estimate of that backlog work is very important. The second is the sales forecast, and I know that's not always the easiest thing to obtain because we don't always have the best forecasting from sellers. But again, don't let that stop you. What I've found is you can take a lot of historical data. If you look over the last year, 2 years, you can see seasonality trends. You can see how forecasts from sales actually turned into actuals. So you use that information to build out that forward look from sales as well. And then the third is that $0 bucket, right? So you have those three, you
Mhm.
know, three buckets, and you get your full demand view. And you can see how that, again, depending on the kind of projects, how that burns down over time. So that's demand. And then the capacity, the capacity, if you know how many headcount, what skills you have, you have a very slim down skills list, you have people assigned accordingly. Now you've got the the fundamental building blocks to build a good capacity model. So you got to get there first before you can really build anything worth worth a look, right? So I think that's the key things I would look at first.
Amazing. And maybe just out of curiosity, what would you give in terms of advice to David 10 years ago, just starting off in the space?
Yeah, so I think couple of things. I think um, building as many variables as possible into the model is pretty key because often things will change and morph over time as you learn more about the business, as you learn more about the needs for the capacity model. There's going to be variables you need to change. Like, what is the seasonality? Which regions are we talking about, right? So things like that, things that just levers that you can pull and just make them variable in your capacity model. So don't, try to as few as fixed things as possible. If things are potentially going to change, as many variables as you can do. Also, don't rush the capacity model, right? This isn't something you're just going to throw in, on a Friday afternoon. It takes time to really think through it and structure a good capacity model. And then just iterate on that and build off of that over time. Don't think it's a one and done exercise and like you build something, you throw it up and say, great, we need X amount of headcount with these skills, and we're done. It's a model, right? So you build a model and then inputs will continuously change. The business will change, forecasts will change, capacity will change, right? So you have to be able to continually evolve that and also pull data from what you've seen happen, right? So if you're starting out for the first time, you're going to have some accuracy, but there's going to be some things to improve. So going back and tracking that accuracy also very important. Go back and look at how accurate has our capacity model been over the last quarter, 2 quarters, year, and make those adjustments and why was it off, right? And start just using that data to look at how to future-proof your capacity model.
And I love it so much. Everyone, you're already sharing questions and keep them coming. That's amazing. We will absolutely have a look at them. I love your mentioning of variables in your capacity planning framework, and you mentioned seasonality. Can you maybe take us on your journey, learning more about seasonality and how it has impacted capacity planning in your world?
Sure. Yeah. It's, I think really in, there's a few areas, but like regionality is a big thing, right? So depending on if you're a global company, you're having to make build capacity models for different regions. It's really important to look at the seasonality within those regions. Because like if you look at the United States as a comparison to France, the holidays are very different, right? So customers will shut down, a full month in France where very little work's getting done because of that. So you have to it's your demand's gonna be lower. So you got to think about that. Um, so there's a lot of variables within regions. Also things that are, if you are in a product company, as companies release new products or new features, that can also drive a spike in your demand, right? So even though you have a forecast, a lot of times customers will purchase things, but then as soon as, hey, we release these new features, customers get excited and they buy more of those things to go utilize these new features. So it's important both on the demand side of how much headcount you're going to need, but also from a training perspective. Because if it is a new feature or a new product, your team needs to understand and be trained on how to deliver services for that product, right? So those are some of those variables of seasonality you have to look at, right? Some are kind of fixed seasonality, like the regional ones based off of holidays and vacations and things like that. Um, but some of those seasonalities that aren't always as predictable are things like product releases and feature releases, right? So you have to very stay close with understanding the product roadmap for those kind of things.
Yeah, yeah, nice. And from your experience, apart from looking at historic past data, do you think there's any value in proactively perhaps doing some interviews before setting up your capacity planning framework so that you can already account for those, let's say, also cultural nuances, right? France being shut in all of August because that's part of the culture, right? Which is beautiful, different in the US. Maybe also some qualitative aspects could be kind of helpful in that process. Have you ever tapped into that?
I literally had a call on that this morning with discussing that thing with regional leaders because of those kind of things. As we're going into fiscal planning, what are the things we need to think through? Like we have historical data, we know, we can kind of predict what it's going to look like, but are there other things that we may not be aware of in the region, right?
Yeah.
So very, very important. And that's a kind of iterative process too, right? These conversations are continuous. This is not, because things change. There's a lot of things that change within the business over time. So it's good to have those conversations with the leaders just to make sure you have a full, well-rounded view of that. You're not doing it in a silo by yourself.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. I bet you learn a lot about the world in those
You do,
calls.
dude.
And just you mentioned it's always helpful to actually look at how well did I do on my forecast, like what actually happened versus what I planned, the accuracy. What would you say is a good kind of percentage of accuracy when you start off versus when you have been doing it for a few years? What should we aim for?
Yeah, so I think so 80%, I was kind of good at 80-20 rule. I think if you're starting off, if you can get to 80% accuracy from the start, that's pretty good. The further you go along, of course, the further out you're looking, it's harder to get the accuracy, right? So within quarter, I like to try to stay within, plus or minus 2% within the quarter. And then within a year, it's nice to stay within that plus or minus 5%, right? Because you do have fluctuations. There are things that happen that are somewhat out of your control. If you have attrition or if you have, drop in sales, things like that, they can cause challenges there. But to me, you can get those numbers then you're doing very well if you can get to that number.
Yes, nice. It's always good to know when you're doing well, right? It's a nice feeling then. Thanks for sharing. David, I'm really curious. You probably have experienced sudden changes in demand, whether it be spikes or slowdowns. How do you approach them? What are some of the best practices?
Yeah, so I think couple of things. One is using like a global resource pool.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think one of the things I see a lot of times, especially if you're building up a new RMO or if you don't have an RMO team, a lot of time the resource pools are siloed into either a line of business, different regions, things like that. So it's a singular view. So you don't have a good broad view. So if you do that, you don't have the ability to borrow resources across the regions. It's really important to look at the global resource pool. So if you're overutilized in one area, are there other resources with skills that we can pull from a different region, maybe a different line of business, something like that to work. So I think that's a key thing. Second is for subcontractors or vendors, if you have those. If you don't have those, get some good ones. Have them in your back pocket. It's good to have those, keep a warm pool with those teams so they kind of understand what your demand looks like. You can understand what their capacity is too. So you always kind of have that. So if you need somebody, you can pick up the phone, or if it's an emergency, you can pull somebody in, or just to give them insight into, hey, this is what we're seeing the demand look like. We may need, 2 headcount in the next quarter from you all. What is your capacity demand look like, right? So you just kind of have that, that partnership. So that way you're looking at your internal resources, the full breadth of them, and you're looking at the ability of your external resources. So I think that's the best way just to keep ahead of those sudden changes, because they do happen. They will come up where you'll need more capacity at a certain point in time than you expected.
Yeah. And in our prep call, you mentioned you would recommend a small and consistent contract bench. And I thought that was very clever. So can you maybe take us into your approach? What does small and consistent look like for your contract bench? And how do you manage those relationships so that they're really warm and ready when you need them?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's a good point. I think oftentimes, if you're in a services RMO, you get approached by a lot of vendors or subcontractors who want to provide their services, right? And they all have very good resources and willing to help. But if you spread too thin, then you get disinterest in some of the subcontractors, right? Because if you're not providing enough work across all of them, then they're like, well, my it's not worth my time, investing in this relationship. But if you keep that pool small, right, depending on how many subcontractors you use in your business, if you use 2 or 3 subcontractors and keep them constant, with work going to them, they know that they're going to get some things. It keeps them enticed to continue investing in training of their resources in your area of business. They have a stream of revenue that they can depend on as well. So there's that true partnership. But again, if you get spread too thin, if you call somebody up, you haven't talked to them in 6 months, hey, I need somebody next week, they're going to say, we don't have anybody. But if you're having weekly calls with your subcontractors and saying, hey, this is what things are looking like, we need to resources, they they will be much more engaged with you as a partner.
Yeah, I can absolutely relate to that. 100% agree. Nice. Thanks for sharing some tips. I'll ask one more question and then we will slowly tap into your questions from the audience. So feel free to keep them coming. I love that there are already 6 questions in our backlog. That's amazing. Thanks for being super engaged, everyone. And I will pull up this question here around. There's so much stuff but maybe let's go with this one. Um, how is AI reshaping the way you plan and manage capacity? There's a lot of talk about AI at the moment. You're just coming back from TSIA, AI being one of the main themes and points of interest. So let's have one look at AI and capacity planning. How can we tap into AI in this field? And how do we keep it human-centered at the same time? I'm really curious to hear your perspective.
So yeah, AI is like you said, coming back from TSIA, that was a major major topic. It was really the theme of the entire TSIA conference. I think in resource management, I think in the short term, the biggest play for AI will be in staffing. That'd be like the short term. So, looking at skills, into a tool, looking at the demand needs, and then marrying those together. I think that'll be like the first real step of AI as far as resource management goes. And I think in the longer run, view, it'll be around capacity planning, right? So I think going into that capacity models, like I mentioned before, some of that like sales data is not always that clean. And to use AI effectively, you need it to be a little cleaner. However, I mentioned going back and looking at historical data to see how does that trend over time? How do the forecasts actually turn into actual closed deals? Well, we're doing that with people, right? We're having people going in and doing that analysis to those comparisons. I think it'll be really heavily utilized in that space where you can scrub that data with AI much more quickly, much more efficiently to put into your models, and you can utilize things, prompting to say, okay, what if we have an increase of X% and put in seasonality things. You can do all those things with AI rather than having somebody going back and tracking historical information. So I think that'll be key. I think what in resource management, I think what the landscape will become much more strategic, right? So resource management has become more strategic over time. But I think as AI comes into the fold, it'll be less tactical. It'll be less of the staffing and that kind of piece, and it'll be more developing processes, looking at you know, uh, insights for the business, like looking at those resourcing insights rather than, like I said, doing those manual staffing things, right? Even things like the things that people work on, how is that impacting what their skills are, right? So if you know what people are working on and you know what the skills are, can we all use AI to already update that? So it kind of eliminates the need for you to go do those manual things and really focus on building out the data sets, building out the insights, looking at the bigger picture and being more strategic in your thoughts rather than just tactical. So I think AI is going to be exciting. I think it's going to take some time to get into all these different areas, because it's going to be, you get to try it. There's going to be a lot of oversight from people to look at this. Even if you get into staffing, you don't want to just throw the reins over to AI, say, oh, go staff all our projects without any kind of human oversight, especially in the beginning, right? We got to make sure that what we're providing our customers is the right person, for both our customers and for our employees, right? So it's an exciting time. I think it's going to unfold nicely over the next 2 to 3 years.
Amazing. Thanks so much for your perspective on this intriguing topic. And you would all do me a favor if you could maybe upvote the questions in the backlog just by giving it a thumbs up. This way I can prioritize the sequence of them. Thank you. So I'm going to pick the first question. David, get ready. We've got a lovely question from Nick. Hi, Nick. Thanks for joining us. And Nick is sharing, leveraging global resource pool is a mighty tool. How do you work with the local teams to ensure they embrace global resources given to them as equal team members rather than a fail-safe that only gets leftovers of a workload after the day ends in the primary location? PS, jealous of the guitars.
Thanks. Uh, it's a great question. I think, and it takes time to build that up. I think having a global RMO, if you don't have a global RMO, is very important, because it helps us solve some of those problems. That's why I was talking about the silos and the area regions. I think oftentimes that's where you get into those kind of situations you're talking about, is like, hey, these are my people and they're going to get everything first. And then if we have somebody left over, we'll throw you some, whatever we've got. But if you have a global RMO looking at it as a holistic, true resource pool, and they're agnostic, right? They're using the right people who can fit the bill the best. It starts to eliminate some of that. But you have to work with the local business leaders to kind of first make them understand it is a full resource pool, but then a global RMO will assign resources according to the workload needed, right? So it gets out of that,
Mhm.
favoritism thing, or hey, we're only focusing, this is the most important region. You have to look at it like pulling out. That's more the strategy level, right, of doing that. So it is not it's not an easy thing, but I think that's the first point, is getting a non-biased group like a global RMO to do that staffing and capacity planning across your whole organization.
Nice, nice. Thank you both, Nick and David, for question and the beautiful answer. Awesome. I'm going to pick the next one with 2 thumbs up. Um, are there good resources online for actual capacity planning models or templates? That's a great question. Have you used anything that's
I would go to the Resource Management Institute website. For those of you who don't know, there is a Resource Management Institute that specializes in resource management specifically. So you can sign up there for free and get access to resources there. They have a plethora of resources. There are discussions about capacity. There's a lot of white papers, a lot of the things like the question you just asked about the using a global resourcing pool. Those kinds of things are available on their site that you can go pull down, read through. So it's very helpful. I would recommend anybody who hasn't been there to look at that.
nice? And I believe you're also on the board, aren't you?
I am on the board.
Yeah.
It's the resource man. I saw somebody asked to repeat that. It's a Resource Management Institute, the RMI.
Mhm.
So I think it's actually resourcemanagementinstitute.com. But if you just Google Resource Management Institute, it'll pop up.
Fantastic. Awesome. Anything else apart from the RMI that pops into your mind for capacity planning models, templates?
I don't know of any other templates there. Again, that's where I think it's a good starting point is there. That it also kind of depends on your business too, right? It's all businesses are a little bit different, so it does require some nuance depending on what you deliver as a company. So I think that's the best starting point, I would say.
Nice. Thank you so much. And to anyone listening, if you know of a great capacity planning model or template, feel free to share it with us in the chat so everyone can benefit. That would be amazing. Awesome. So let's move on to our next question. But before we do that, Nick also replied, we're building it, the Global Resource Management Office. They're currently building one. The RMO is more global than the service delivery is. So thank you for the answer, he's saying. Nice. Fantastic. um, cool. So I'll pick the next question, also with a thumbs up. How do you strike the right balance between looking at future headcount needs with existing staff who might be available for a project at a later date in the year? How can we manage that better, especially with senior leaders who have less of an appetite for risk?
So if I'm understanding the question, um, is it looking at how to use resources, plan for using those resources further out than using them today? Because right now we know what we have today, but we don't want to hold them off for the next project. Is that kind of the gist of the question?
I guess so. Let's go with that.
Correct. Um, so I think it's I would avoid it a little bit from looking at named people, right? A capacity model wouldn't be, necessarily, you know, Jane Smith will be on this project now, or should she be on this project later? It is really looking at from a headcount skill role level, right? So
Mm,
names, you're not the name of it. It gets more into, I think, the staffing piece. This is just looking at at a month by month view, a week by week view, how many headcount with these skill sets do we need to achieve the customer needs that we have?
mhm,
So it's less about the actual people. So if you can provide that to the business to say, okay, you have 25 people and we need 27 people for this month, we got to go figure out how to staff that, right? And so we need to get subcontractors, or if we see a growth pattern for a long period of time, that might be a justification for hiring, right? It just
mhm.
depends on if it's a spike or if it's a long-term growth pattern. So I think showing the business just that level of detail, not getting down to that, kind of help with that, so where they're not thinking about, oh, this person's going to be doing this and this person's going to be doing that. It's just looking at what is the headcount and the skill set needed? And then you can figure out, do we need to train, we need to hire, we need to get subcontracting, those kind of things.
Nice, nice. And I see Jet is just sharing a link from the RMI. Thank you so much for that. That's super helpful. And thanks, David, for your take on this question. If the question was aimed at a different direction, feel free to specify a bit more, and we'll happily pick it up again. Awesome. Cool. Feel free to give some further thumbs up so I can prioritize. I can see some thumbs coming in. So I'll pick this question from Michelle. Thank you so much, Michelle. How do you factor in role efficiency or productivity differences when calculating FTE requirements? How do you factor in role efficiency or productivity differences? Aha. Okay, now I get it. Yeah.
This is around specific roles and the expectations of those roles, I'm
Mhm.
assuming.
Yeah, that's what I
So,
understand too.
so one of the things that we do is we do set different utilization targets for different types of roles. So as an example, we have some roles, and it's not necessarily roles as in like a project manager or a consultant. It could be a group of resources that might have a lower utilization number because they're being asked to do a bunch of other non-billable things. So they're not going to be as efficient. You could also apply that to if you have junior resources versus senior resources. You could depend on how you want to do it. So like what we do is we set different utilization targets for two different uh, groups of resources, and then we use that in our capacity model. So we know, as an example, just make these numbers up, but if we have one group who we think are going to be 60% productive and another
Mhm.
group that's going to be 72% productive because of their different groups of roles, then we know how many we have in each one of those things, what their skills are, and then we can say, well, that's the capacity they can provide. So that's how we utilize that. We just set different utilization targets for those different teams, which we roll into our capacity. So we know the headcount and how many hours we can get out of those resources based off those capacity or those utilization models.
Just making super sure I understand. I'm just thinking about an upcoming project. It's in our pipeline. It just landed. The client signed the deal. And for example, we've got the demand of two perhaps technical experts, but these two, so two FTE in a certain technical expertise, there might be differences. For example, one person might be an overperformer and always smashes projects, is super productive, efficient, versus someone else might be maybe out of some circumstances less productive. So when a project requires one FTE, how do you account for different personal working styles as such? Does that make sense? It's a slightly different question, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's kind of get down to the staffing. When you look into capacity, it's much higher level. So that's why we use those buckets of hours that
Mhm.
each group can deliver. Now, there are going to be some, as an example, my 72% number. There's going to be some people who are going to deliver way more than that, and some who are going to deliver less than that because perhaps they just aren't as efficient. They just don't deliver as much. So those things should balance out in a capacity model. Now, when you get down to the staffing piece of that, that comes down to using those. There's going to be the skills database, but there's also that's where ARMO is important because they can kind of look at the resources and know, okay, we have to staff, maybe to staff two people on this one if we use these two people, but maybe it's just one person if we, if it's this person because they're going to knock it out of the park and they don't need this extra effort. But a lot of that comes down to your skills too, right? If you're measuring your skills, if as an example, if you're measuring on a basic, intermediate, expert level, as you're doing your capacity planning, if you have,
Mhm.
five people who are basics and one person who's an expert, then you realize you may have a gap in your capacities because those people who are basic are not going to be as efficient as the people who's going to be an
Mhm.
expert, right? So you have to take that's kind of what I was saying, but the head count and the skills, you have to use those in conjunction with one another. It's not just head count, but it's the head count with which skill.
Mhm.
So if you
Mhm.
say, oh, we're playing this capacity for this, but we only have five people who kind of know it, and we know we have one person who's going to crush it every time, then you have to balance that capacity out. You can use it in different ways. You can put a ratio to it for because you have six head count, but it may be a lower ratio because it's 5 of them are basics and one's an expert, as an example.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Thank you so much for clarifying. That makes a lot of sense. Cool. And Michelle is definitely very engaged. There is another question with 3 thumbs up. Thank you so much, Michelle. This is the one I'm going to pick next. What platforms are most effective for real-time capacity tracking? Dashboards, time tracking tools, or project management systems?
Great question. A lot of PSAs have capacity models built within them, which are great to start with. The challenge tends to be on the sales data side, right? And some of that $0 data side. So the backlog should be fairly simple to pull in because if you're using a PSA, it's in your PSA, so you already have that data set. But the other two, even if you have a tie-in from your CRM, tool from sales, that data is not always accurate, right? So a lot of times we'll use things outside of the PSA tool for like long-term capacity planning. It's really good for short-term because it's based off that backlog that you need. But in the longer-term capacity models, a lot of times we'll pull some information out into like a Tableau or CRMA or something like that, where we can manipulate the data a bit more to get us that data on the sales side and some of that $0 work to build us out a true capacity model. So I think it's kind of a conjunction. If you're looking for long term, I think using, like I said, a Tableau or CRMA. If it's more of a short to midterm, you're utilizing your PSA tools capacity planning model can also be pretty effective as well. Again, that assumes that you have your skills database updated, that you have your backlog is clean, you understand how your backlog is going to burn down, you have that all built out into your PSA, then you can use that.
Nice. Awesome. Thanks, Michelle and David. Very insightful. Cool. Awesome. Please keep the questions coming. This is going very awesomely. Love it. So let's take this question. Michelle, thank you. What are some common mistakes leaders make when justifying new headcount?
That's a good one. I think we talked about this a bit too. I think a key thing, I didn't mention this earlier, this is a common mistake I should have raised. Oftentimes, I've seen requests for headcount fall flat because they're not integrated with the finance teams. So a
Mhm.
lot of times, finance is the ones who have the pocketbooks to release funds for things. So often they create their own capacity models, top-down capacity models based off of the revenue that you're going to generate. So they may go look at it and say, okay, you're going to make X millions of dollars. You have to have 100 headcount. And they just do a simple division on utilization to figure out to get to that number. And then the delivery leaders, the RMO realizes that everybody's overextended, super busy. They go ask for headcount. And they say, nope, you should be able to deliver this revenue with this 100 people. They're missing out on that $0 internal work bucket, right? So oftentimes that gets missed because that, even though it's not generating revenue, it is still a demand that requires capacity. So the delivery leaders feel that need because they're delivering for the revenue and they're delivering for all this other stuff that's not that revenue. And so they feel the pain. So they're asking for headcount. Finance is looking at it saying, no, you're making this revenue, there's just this many people. So it's really before annual planning starts and even during the years, having regular cadences with the finance team to truly understand the real capacity picture. They're going to always have theirs, but so they can understand that other nuance that they're not accounting for is super important. And I've seen this at almost every company I've ever been in. You have to really get ingrained with the FP&A team because of that. So that's a common mistake I see. If you can bridge that gap with finance early on to where they understand the why you need that headcount, not just because, oh, we're busy. This is why we're busy. You're not accounting for that in your model. And I think that's very helpful. It's proven to be very helpful.
Amazing.
And
Maybe just
people, best friend, if you just gotta
yeah.
gotta work with them.
Maybe just from your experience, David, I could imagine if there is a resource manager or maybe even a resource management team not closely aligned to the finance team yet, what is a good way of approaching them? Who from finance would you say is a good kind of touch point contact, and how could this first kind of reach out look like? Which language do they speak? How can we utilize that?
Exactly. I think that is a great question. I think the best way is usually every business has some finance business partner aligned to them, right? So if you're in a professional services business, they usually have some finance who's creating revenue targets and things like that for the business. So reaching out to them, but doing it in a curious way. Hey, we're the RMO team. We look at capacity. We're looking at capacity planning for next fiscal year. We'd like to understand from finance, how do you all forecast the capacity needs that we have, and the headcount that are allowed in the budget, right? How are you guys calculating that? So if you can understand their methodology of saying, if it is a top down where it's X amount of revenue divided by this many hours gets us to this many people, and that's how they do it, then yet that gives you the opportunity to say, oh, well, have you thought about, there's these other things that we do as well that are not accounted for in this model. How do you guys think about that? And a lot of times it'll be a big question mark. They haven't even thought about that because they're not in the business day to day. They're looking at dollars and cents. So I think approaching them with that curiosity of how do you set these headcount numbers, that A, gets you to understand their methodology, which is very helpful, and then B, allows you to inject the part that they may not be thinking about, right? And then you just kind of, and it's not confrontational. It's a partnership. Hey, we have a gap, we have a challenge. How can we work together to get to that point? It might be you have to be creative about it. More headcount, but maybe they have to be in a lower cost area, or maybe we have to use. It could be many ways to solve the problem, but I think that's the good first step.
Love it. And I love the language you used in our prep call, which was the finance team is looking at those kind of planning metrics top down, and a resource manager, capacity planner can bring also the bottom up perspective. And when you bring both together, you have a more holistic view of what actually happens, right? So both sides can benefit. Yeah, nice. Awesome. Thank you so much. Wonderful. More questions coming. Oh, this is exciting. Okay, let's go with Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer, very much for your question. So David, you mentioned backlog reviews. What cadence would you recommend for those? And who do you think should be involved in them? Great question.
A good question. So oftentimes, I think the RMO can lead those conversations with the delivery teams. So oftentimes, like things get booked, they get into backlog, and the delivery team just off working, right? They're not looking at that backlog. But it's important to look at if there are things that are stale, right? If you're saying, hey, these are things we expected these to burn at this rate, they're not. Why is that? So having a regular cadence, and that could depend. So a lot of times we try to do it like on a monthly basis to get down to like some project level detail of some things. And then a lot of times over like in a quarter, we'll look at it like everything and say, okay, where do we have things that have had no time on them? Why do they have no time on them? Should we consider this in our backlog anymore? Is this going to be leakage? Having those kind of views at a quarterly level are good, but I think at least monthly on things that maybe actually be moving, but not moving as quickly as they should be, and have those conversations with the delivery teams so they can see also the impact of that. Because if they're like, oh, it's not burning as fast, okay, but these are the implications of that happening. It could be a revenue situation. It could be, oh, well, we plan on this demand being completed. Now we're pushing that demand out into the next, let's say the next quarter. We already had a spike in demand, so that's going to be put us up even here. So that gives us a bigger problem next quarter if we don't burn that now. So having that conversation with them and having them as part of the discussion is very important.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much. Great insight. And just a FYI to everyone, I think this is already a new record. This is the webinar in about 2.5 years of running these with the most questions asked. So I'm very, very excited. Cool. Let's try to answer as many as possible. Still 6 in the backlog. That's awesome. And I'm going to use Jed. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And because you were so kind to also share the link in the chat, let's go with you next. So, what is your experience of identifying and managing digital points of failure in the resource plan? So what is your experience of identifying and managing digital points of failure in your resource plan? You mentioned a scenario where you have one once experienced one experienced resource and five less experienced resources. The risk is that the experienced resource becomes overtasked due to the lack of experience in a particular skill.
Right. So I think, and that's where I think you use capacity models not only for hiring decisions, but for training decisions, right? So you can see, you can oftentimes see where you're being overloaded. And I think it goes back to also looking at utilization, which we didn't touch on very much, but utilization leveling is a key component that drives into capacity models. And when I say that, I mean, let's just say you have a 65% utilization target and you're hitting 65%. You look at it at a macro level, average of the team is 65%. Everybody's like, great. But you got to look at that bell curve. How
Mhm.
how many people are below the 65% and how low are they and how many people are way above that, and to try to balance that out because you don't want to have that burnout of those people. So understanding that will give you an insight into if we have one person who's an expert, we have five persons who are basics, and that one person is always at 120% of their target consistently, that helps to drive the argument of we need to train these other five people to get up to that level, or bring on, potentially bring more people in depending on the situation. But I
Mhm.
think that's also a great thing to use capacity models for is the training needs, right? That's why it's important not to look at it just as a head count, but as head count and skills, because you need to, especially if you only have one, like in this example, if you have one expert and you have a demand, you don't want to have one because there's always a chance that person burns out, they go on PTO, or there's a lot of things
Mhm.
that happen. So you need to diversify your team a bit more. That's where it's helpful to look at that skills.
Nice. Love it. Thanks so much, Get, for your question. And thanks, David, for your beautiful answer. Nice. Let's see. And feel free to give some thumbs up so I can prioritize. Otherwise, I'm gonna pick this next question from Michelle. So, how do you how do you evaluate when to solve a capacity issue with technology rather than hiring? Who? How do you
Yeah.
evaluate to solve a capacity issue with technology rather than hiring? Interesting.
Yes. I think that's around maybe an automation question. So I'll take it that way because I think I've seen this before in certain situations where we'll see a growth in a certain area where we have an increasing demand, right? And we see it's the same type of work that continues over and over and over again, right? So when we see that and we see, oh, we need to go get more people in this area, but it's a task that it's repetitive.
Mhm.
That's the time when we say, okay, does it make sense to go hire people or to go outside spend with a subcontract, or does it make more sense to go develop automation to deliver this thing
Mhm.
automatically? And I have made those decisions before in previous places to say we can't continue hiring. I mean, this is not slowing down. If it's a spike, then you can solve that. But if you see a long-term growth pattern and you're going to have to start hiring people, then you start looking at, does it make more financial sense rather than going as a one-to-one hiring to go develop an automation or tool or purchase a tool to help you go deliver that, right? So I think that's the key thing, is just doing that cost analysis. And you have to do that obviously in conjunction with the business because they're going to be the determining factor of that. But using a good capacity model helps you articulate that need. You say, hey, here's the business problem we have. We have a growth here. We have to hire more people, which is going to cost us X number of dollars. Or can we go automate this with a tool or build a homegrown tool to go solve this problem, right? So I think that's a great question. That's how I
Mhm.
use it. That's how I use capacity models to do that.
Fantastic. Thanks, both of you. The next question that is highest in priority goes like this. Currently going through a larger scale merge. How do you convince leadership team that resource management needs to be a priority in order to see the bigger picture of what we are working with? Seems like it's on the back burner for leadership for now, as they don't plan on looking at upgrades in resource management software until after next year.
Great question. I think a really key thing to do if you don't have a resource management charter is to build one. I think that's the
Mhm.
first thing that you can do, something that you can hand over to a team. And I think in that resource management charter is to show that strategic value that resource management can provide and the benefit that it has, right? So if you can show as we build this capacity model, if we have a full view of the staffing and we need these tools to go do that, if we better utilize these resources, we can drive down subcontract spend. We can increase utilization. And every point of utilization is worth X amount of dollars across X amount of resources. And you put in those dollars and cents into your charter to show the impact that resource management can have. That helps to put it in front of people to have those conversations because I'm guilty of this when I first started doing this of just going to people saying, hey, we can do these great things. And they're like, okay, I'm sure you can, but we don't have the money for it. But if you can show the ROI clearly, and it's very simple to do when you start looking at points of utilization and the revenue that can drive and the like lower subcontract spend if you utilize your resources better, right? So if you can start building that business case and put it in your charter, these are the things that we can do. These are the things that we need to go do it. Here's what they cost, and here's the value that we can bring if we have that in place, right? So I think articulating that very clearly is a great first step. But I appreciate that challenge. It's not an uncommon thing. There's actually on the Resource Management Institute site, there are charters that you can pull off their site to go build out one if you don't already have one to help with that.
Nice. And the RMI also has a model in place where you can, for your business, translate the percentage point of utilization increase into a dollar value. So also very, very helpful. Thanks, RMI, for that. Cool. Awesome. We've got 4 more questions. Let's try to answer them. And then we will slowly but surely, sadly, wrap up. It's been such a pleasure with you, David. Wow, time is flying. So let's go with this one next. Michelle, thank you. She says, yes, goes along with the common mistakes that we talked about earlier. How do you convince senior leadership to trust the capacity model when the business historically made staffing decisions based on intuition or relationships?
That's a, I appreciate that question because I've, I've crossed this challenge several times, so I get it. It goes back to that measuring the accuracy of the capacity model. So I would always take into account when you're building it out, like starting it from scratch. It's why it's like it's not a one and done, but if you create one and you just run it alongside for a while, like you don't have to go shout from the rooftops. We have this brand new capacity model. It's it's perfect. But if you build one out and you start tweaking it and then tracking it over the course of just a month, 2 months, a quarter, and then look back at the accuracy of that and put that and document that as you go along, and then sharing that with the business to say, hey, we built this capacity model 3 months ago, and for a year out. After the first quarter, we are let's just say we're within 10% accuracy of what happened by the end of the quarter, right? So we'd like to start using this with you guys and explain to them how it's built out, all the variables that you put into it. So making people understand that there's a lot of variables taken into account makes people realize, okay, they thought about this, right? And when you get away from that intuition, because a lot of times you're just like, oh, well, we feel like it's going to be busy in July because it's always busy in July. Well, we have historical information that shows when it should be busier and when it's not. And we have actual data of what our resources are capable of doing and what they're not, right? So if you start showing all the variables that have built up your capacity model and show some time frame of that you've been tracking it and there's some accuracy to it, that goes a long way. I think it's convincing them that you know what you're talking about and you're using the data points that build up that capacity. If they start to understand that, they start to trust it over time. It does take time. It's a partnership. It's not going to be
Yeah.
not going to be overnight, but you can get there for sure.
Spot on. Thanks, David. Beautiful. The next question, hopefully we can answer a bit quickly. How do you incorporate contractors into this thinking? You already
Yes. So usually we'll use if it's subcontractors or like non-FTE contractors. We can go both ways. Usually for a contractor who's we're bringing on as like a full-time resource, we treat them as a full-time resource. Subcontractors, we tend to leave those out of our capacity models and use that to fill the gaps. So we'll look at and say, okay, leave subcontracting aside, this is how many FTE we have with either contract or actual employees, and determine what that capacity demand is and where we have peaks and valleys. And those peaks, that's when we start saying, okay, that peak is 4 or 5, whatever that is. And then we start taking into account, okay, that's a peak. We'll use subcontractors for that. If it's a growing peak that never stops, then we need to start looking at hiring or training or things like that. So typically at the bottom level, I don't include the subcontractors in that. It is more of a, okay, we'll need them at these times more than likely, right? And then kind of using that over the long term.
Amazing. So for anyone who needs to jump off now, totally fine. Thank you for joining. We will just continue with the last two questions and then wrap up. So for everyone who's able to spend a few more minutes, you're very much welcome to do so. And the second to last question comes from Jennifer. Thank you so much. She's saying, I joined a little late, so apologies if this has already been asked, but for a resource management office that's just starting to build out capacity planning, what are the top 3 steps you would recommend to establish a strong foundation?
Yeah, I think understanding your demand in those 3 buckets I mentioned. If you joined late, I'm not sure when we talked about this, but a backlog that you have to deliver and the time it takes to burn that backlog, the sales forecasts that you expect for the next year with some historical massaging of data based off of how things tend to work, and then your $0 internal projects that you have to understand your full capacity or demand. That's the first step I would take. Second step would be to understand the capacity you have with the skills of your team. How many headcount you have, what skills they have in an automated way, right? So if you get those 2 things together, then you've got a good basis. And then looking at all the variables that are important to your business. That's the third thing, right? So if you, like, again, if you're a regionalized business, then you need to look at those kind of assumptions. If you are a product-based business, you need to look at some assumptions based off of product roadmaps. So understanding your full capacity, your full demand, and then those variables that are going to impact both of those things are the things. If you can get those buckets figured out, and then you can put those all together to make a very nice capacity model.
Fantastic. And thanks, both of you, for the question and the answer. It's a very nice way of just repeating those very important steps so that they stick to our mind, because our brain learns through repetition. So that was super helpful. Thank you. And the last question, last but not least, from Michelle. Thank you so much, Michelle, for kindly sharing so many questions. That's beautiful. Earlier, you mentioned utilization averages tend to balance out across teams, but in practice, over and under performers can still skew results. Have you seen any effective ways to quantify individual efficiency without creating tension or over monitoring?
Yeah. So what we do is we look at on a regular basis, we look at that leveling. Who is under and who is over. And when I say that by some magnitude, if it's like 10% under, 10% over, maybe not a big deal. But if you start getting, wild variations,
Mhm.
tracking that on an ongoing basis, do you see the same names every time? If you see the same names every time in one of those places, we need to go dig into why. So it's in working with the delivery leaders to say, hey, this person is burning at really hot. I'm concerned about they're going to burn out. Like, what's going on? Can we offload that to this person who seems to be not being utilized as much? Had a perfect example of this. Just a very quick anecdote, but I had somebody who joined a company that I was at that I had worked with at a previous company. One of the smartest people that I knew, a consultant. He came in. He was hired in because he was brilliant. Problem was nobody knew who he was, so they weren't staffing him on projects. So his utilization, we're doing this utilization leveling, and he's like very, very low. And I look at this, and at first I was like, okay, he's new, but then over time he stayed low. And I said, why is he so low? And I said, well, we don't really, people don't know him. I said, this guy is super smart. I just knew it because I knew him. But then people started giving him things, and then he quickly became a top performer. But it was more of it wasn't that didn't know things. It was that he was newer and he wasn't a comfort button. So it's really important to go look at that and make sure that those things aren't happening. Like, so, and a good way to do that is say, concerned about this person burning out. This person has a good skill set. Let's go use them more and offload some of this off this person to help level that out. So that's a good way to do it with not being confrontational. Is I'm concerned over here because of that. And over here, we need to get them more engaged. So can we just offer a little bit of spread between these two people as an example?
Exactly. And thank you for sharing this example. It just points out that low utilization doesn't mean it's a low performer, not at all, right? So yeah, great way to yeah, stay curious and to really understand more deeply what is happening beyond just the data.
Yep.
Um, very much. Awesome. So 15 questions, new record. Thank you, everyone, so much. Most of all, thank you, David, for very generously sharing all of your 10, 25 years of experience with us so kindly. It's been such a pleasure. I wish we could just continue to talk forever. Sadly, the webinar is already over. But yeah, really, really enjoyable. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us. Yeah, and looking forward to yeah, the next webinar probably happening in January. We will keep you posted. And everyone have a fantastic end of the year, a beautiful autumn and winter time, and see you soon. Take care and goodbye.